In life, there are moments of silence that seem to speak louder than words. These are the moments when someone we care about, someone who once filled our days with conversation, suddenly disappears into a void of silence. It can stir a storm within us, an emotional whirlwind that we struggle to calm. We find ourselves staring at our phones, hoping for a call that never comes or waiting for a message that stays unread. The unanswered calls and the blank screens are the silent signals that something has changed. In that moment, we can't help but wonder, why aren't they reaching out? What did I do wrong? We fill that silence with a cascade of questions, self-doubt, sadness, and sometimes even anger. The silence feels heavy, as if it is a reflection of something we have lost. It feels like a void, an emptiness that pulls at our hearts. Yet, could it be that this silence isn't truly empty? Is it possible that, in the absence of sound, there is something much deeper that we are overlooking? Something profound that we fail to understand because we are too busy listening to our own fears and anxieties? As the ancient wisdom of Zen teaches us, a falling tree makes more noise than a growing forest. This simple yet powerful reminder calls us to reflect on the way we react to the noise of life. We are conditioned to pay attention to loud sounds, to the things that demand our immediate reaction. But in doing so, we often overlook the subtle wisdom that exists in the silence. The quiet moments are not meaningless or empty, they are full of meaning. They are an invitation to reflect, to grow, and to find peace within ourselves. Today, we will explore the profound teachings of Zen and the Buddha to uncover the deeper truths behind silence. What does silence really mean when someone we care about disappears into it? And more importantly, how can we learn to respond to it, not with pain or frustration, but with peace and understanding? Through a story that speaks to the heart of this question, we will unravel the mystery of silence and discover how we can find wisdom in those moments when words are absent. Join me on this journey of self-reflection, as we seek to understand that silence is not a void, it is a space full of potential, waiting to be filled with wisdom, peace, and growth. Silence is not emptiness, as many might believe. In Buddhism and Zen teachings, silence is viewed as a space full of potential, an opportunity for reflection, growth, and understanding. We often mistake silence for rejection or indifference. When someone stops reaching out to us, we may interpret their absence as a sign that we are no longer valued or important. But in truth, silence is not an indication of neglect, it is an invitation to look deeper within ourselves. The Buddha's teachings emphasize that attachment is the root of all suffering. We become attached to the idea that just because someone was once present in our lives, they must always remain there. This attachment breeds expectation, and when those expectations are not met, it leads to pain. We cling to people, situations, and experiences, believing that they define our happiness. But life is ever-changing. Just as the river flows continuously and the wind shifts direction, so too do the people in our lives. They come and go, sometimes unexpectedly, and this constant movement is part of the natural flow of existence. Zen masters remind us of the wisdom found in nature. A flower does not chase the bee. The bee comes when the flower is ready. This simple yet profound teaching illustrates the truth that life unfolds in its own time. The flower does not pursue the bee. It does not demand the bee's attention. It patiently waits, knowing that when the time is right, the bee will come. Similarly, when someone becomes absent from our lives, it does not necessarily mean they have forgotten us or that they no longer care. Sometimes, their absence is simply a result of their own journey, their own path, and their own timing. When we learn to understand silence in this way, it brings us peace. We stop viewing silence as a rejection or a failure. Instead, we see it as an opportunity to let go of our attachments and expectations. This understanding allows us to embrace the natural ebb and flow of life. Just as we cannot control the wind or the movement of the river, we cannot control the flow of relationships. The more we try to force these connections, the more we create suffering for ourselves. But when we stop chasing after people, when we let go of the need to always be in contact, we can finally experience the peace that comes from embracing life as it unfolds. Zen philosophy teaches us to embrace silence as a natural part of the rhythm of our relationships. Silence is not an absence of connection, but a pause, a space that gives room for understanding, for growth, and for the natural unfolding of life. We may find that during these periods of quiet, we are given the opportunity to reflect on ourselves, to become more self-aware, and to deepen our own inner peace. Instead of feeling rejected by the silence, we can choose to see it as a chance to grow, to understand ourselves more fully, and to learn the art of letting go. Silence is not a void, it is a moment to rest, to breathe, and to be. It is not a sign that something is wrong, but rather a reminder that life moves in cycles, that things change, and that we are part of that ever-changing flow. By embracing silence and accepting it as a natural part of life, we can release the anxiety that often accompanies it. We learn that the absence of sound is not a threat to our happiness, but a space where peace, growth, and clarity can emerge. Let me share with you the story of two friends, whose bond was once as unbreakable as the roots of an ancient tree. They spent countless moments together, laughing, learning, and sharing their lives. Under the same sun, they found joy in each other's company. Beneath the same moon, they found comfort in knowing they were never truly alone. They shared their deepest thoughts, fears, and dreams, as though they were two halves of the same soul. Life seemed simple and full of harmony, and nothing could have seemed more certain than the connection they had. But as life often does, it carried them in different directions. One friend chose to remain in the place they had always known, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of their hometown. The other, driven by a thirst for new experiences, ventured off into unknown lands. They sought adventure, growth, and the opportunity to chase their dreams. At first, the distance between them didn't seem to matter. The bond they shared felt as strong as ever. They continued calling each other regularly, sending messages, and catching up on each other's lives. The rhythm of their friendship remained steady, just as it had been before the miles separated them. There was comfort in the knowledge that despite the distance, the connection would endure. But as time went on, something began to change. The calls became less frequent, the messages slower, and then, the silence arrived. At first, it was just a few days of waiting for a reply. Then a week, and before long, weeks turned into months. The one who stayed behind began to feel the absence like a weight pressing down on their chest. They found themselves staring at their phone, hoping for the familiar sound of a message or a call. But the screen remained empty. The waiting became unbearable. With every passing day, the silence grew louder. The one who remained in their familiar place began to question everything. Have they forgotten me? Did I do something wrong? Thoughts of doubt, anger, and sadness filled their mind. It felt as if the connection they once had was slipping away, like water running through their fingers. The silence felt like a void, an unspoken rejection, and with each unanswered message, the bond seemed to fray further. But instead of allowing the silence to consume them, they decided to seek wisdom. They realized that in this moment of uncertainty, there was something to learn, something beyond the fear and hurt. So, they set off on a journey to find answers, determined to understand the silence, and how to respond to it without letting it destroy them. Their journey led them to 3 teachers, each offering a unique perspective on what it meant when someone stops reaching out, and what silence really signifies in our relationships. The first teacher they met was an old hermit who lived in the mountains, a man known for his deep wisdom and silence. The seeker asked, "Why do people disappear? Why do they stop calling or messaging?" Instead of answering right away, the hermit poured a cup of tea, but he did not offer it. He simply placed it on the table in front of the seeker. The seeker, puzzled, reached out for the cup, and only then did the hermit speak. "If you want the tea, you take it. If you do not, you leave it. The tea does not chase you." The seeker was confused. "What does this have to do with my question?" they asked. The hermit smiled gently, explaining, "People, like tea, are where they choose to be. Some drink from your cup, and some do not. The tea does not worry, it simply exists. Just as with people, if they do not call or message, it is not about you. It is simply where they are in life." The second teacher was a wise merchant, known for his fairness. He was busy weighing goods on a scale when the seeker approached him with the same question. The merchant placed a heavy stone on one side of the scale and smaller pebbles on the other. Watching as the scale shifted, "Balance shifts with time," the merchant said. "Sometimes, what once held great value no longer does. Not because it is less important, but because priorities change. When someone stops reaching out, it is not because you are unimportant, it is because their life has taken a different course." Finally, The seeker met an old monk who sat in quiet contemplation on an empty bench. The seeker approached the monk and asked, "How should I respond when people forget me?" Without speaking, the monk pointed to the empty bench. "Sit," he said. Time passed, the wind blew, and leaves fell, yet the monk remained silent. Eventually, he spoke. "Did you notice how the bench remains still, regardless of who comes or goes?" The seeker nodded. "Be like the bench," the monk advised. "Let people come and go as they must. Do not chase them. Do not resent them. Stay still in your own peace." And so, the seeker learned from these wise teachers. The silence they once feared became a space for reflection, not rejection. It was not a sign of abandonment but an invitation to let go of attachment and to embrace the natural flow of life. Silence, they discovered, was not a void, it was a pause in the rhythm of their relationship. A moment to grow, to understand, and to accept life as it unfolded. 1. The Hermit and the Tea. The first teacher the seeker encountered was a hermit, an old man who lived alone in the mountains, known for his wisdom and silence. His home was sparse, with nothing but a few simple possessions, and the air around him seemed to be imbued with calmness and clarity. The seeker, in search of understanding, approached him with a question that had been troubling them for weeks. Why do people disappear? Why do they stop calling or messaging? Does it mean they no longer care? Instead of answering right away, the hermit poured a cup of tea and placed it on the table before the seeker. The seeker, confused and eager for an answer, reached for the cup, but the hermit stopped them with a gentle word. "If you want the tea, you take it. If you do not, you leave it. The tea does not chase you." The seeker paused, puzzled, not understanding how this act could possibly answer their question. After a moment, the hermit smiled kindly and spoke again. "People, like tea, are where they choose to be. Some drink from your cup, and some do not. The tea does not worry, it simply exists. It does not chase you or beg for your attention. Just like people, if they do not call or message, it is not a personal choice against you. It is simply where they are in their life." The seeker's mind began to open. They realized that the absence of communication from their friend was not a rejection but rather a natural state of things, shaped by life's many forces. It wasn't their fault if the person had moved on or was simply focused elsewhere. The lesson was profound. Silence does not signify abandonment. It merely reflects the space where others are in that moment. There is no need to chase after them. Life flows, and sometimes, people flow in and out of our lives as they find their own paths. In this stillness, the seeker learned that it is not the lack of interaction that causes suffering but our attachment to the idea that someone must always be present in our lives. 2. The Merchant and the Scale. The seeker continued their journey and eventually met a merchant known for his fairness and wisdom in matters of life. The merchant was in the midst of weighing goods on a scale when the seeker approached him and asked, "Why do people who once valued us, who seemed so close, become distant? Why do relationships change so suddenly?" The merchant did not answer immediately. Instead, he placed a large, heavy stone on one side of the scale, then placed several small pebbles on the other. As the stone tipped the scale dramatically, he turned to the seeker and said, "Balance shifts with time, just as this scale tips when you add weight to one side. So too do the balances in our relationships change over time." The seeker was still confused. But why do people change? Why do they stop reaching out when they once seemed so invested in us? The merchant explained, "Sometimes, people's priorities change. What once held great value to them may now hold less. Not because it is worthless, but because their needs, circumstances, and focuses have evolved. The shift is not a reflection of your worth. It is about the natural evolution of their journey." The seeker began to understand. The absence of a person in their life wasn't a reflection of their personal value. It was simply a shift in priorities. People go through seasons in their lives, and sometimes those seasons pull them in directions that no longer align with our own. As the merchant had shown, just as the balance on the scale shifts, so too do the energies in relationships. The seeker realized that they had been measuring their worth by the presence or absence of others, when in fact, their value was not tied to anyone's attention. It was simply a part of the natural ebb and flow of life. 3. The Monk and the Empty Bench. The seeker's journey continued until they arrived at a quiet temple, where an elderly monk sat calmly on an empty wooden bench. The monk, known for his deep wisdom, had an aura of stillness and peace that made the seeker feel immediately at ease. The seeker sat down beside him and, after a moment of contemplation, asked, "How should I respond to those who forget me? Who leave without explanation? Who go silent without a word?" Without answering immediately, the monk pointed to the empty bench. "Sit," he said simply. The seeker sat down, waiting for the monk to explain. Time passed slowly. The wind whispered through the trees, and leaves fell gently to the ground. Still, the monk remained silent, his presence calm and unwavering. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the monk spoke. "Did you notice how the bench remains still? No matter who comes or goes." The seeker nodded, the meaning of the monk's words beginning to settle in. The monk continued, "Be like the bench. Stay still in your peace. Let people come and go as they must. Do not chase after them. Do not resent them. Remain whole in your own being, regardless of what others do." The lesson was clear. When we are hurt by the absence of others, we must learn to find peace within ourselves. Just as the bench does not seek out those who sit upon it, we should not chase after people or try to hold on to them. The bench remains unchanged, still, and steady, regardless of who occupies it. In the same way, we are to remain steadfast in our peace. Whether others come into our lives or drift away, our sense of self and inner peace should not be contingent upon the actions or attention of others. Instead, we must find our own stability and calmness, unaffected by the ebb and flow of relationships. The seeker left the monk with a heart full of understanding, realizing that silence and absence were not things to be feared. They were simply pauses in the rhythm of life, invitations to look inward and find peace, regardless of external circumstances. Through these three wise encounters, the seeker learned that silence, distance, and change were not personal affronts, but natural parts of life's journey. They learned to embrace silence, to let go of attachments, and to find peace within themselves, regardless of who came or went. The seeker, now wiser from the lessons learned along their journey, returned home with a newfound clarity. The days of waiting anxiously by the phone, hoping for a call or message, slowly faded away. The anxiety that had once gripped their heart was replaced by a sense of peace. They had learned that silence does not equal abandonment. People, like rivers, follow their own paths, and sometimes, their absence is simply because life has carried them in a different direction. It is not a reflection of your worth or significance. Your value remains unchanged, regardless of whether someone is in constant communication with you or not. Zen teaches us that silence is not something to be feared, but rather something to be embraced. It is not an enemy, but a space for growth, understanding, and inner peace. We often view silence as an uncomfortable void, something that disrupts the flow of our lives and leaves us feeling rejected. But in truth, silence is not empty. It is a space full of potential, a space that offers us the opportunity to look within ourselves and reflect on who we are and what we truly need. In the absence of external noise and distractions, we can begin to hear the voice of our own inner wisdom. When there is no constant chatter to fill our minds, we are left with the opportunity to listen to our emotions, our thoughts, and our deepest desires. This is where true self-reflection happens, in the quiet moments when we are alone with ourselves, unencumbered by the expectations and judgments of others. As the seeker had learned, silence is not a sign that something is wrong, but rather a signal that something is right. It is a reminder that life is constantly shifting, that we are all on our own unique journeys, and that those journeys sometimes take us in different directions. The absence of another person's voice does not invalidate our existence or the connection we once shared. It simply means that life is unfolding as it should, and that we must be open to the ebb and flow of relationships. When we stop fearing silence, we begin to understand that it holds vast opportunities for personal growth. It is in the stillness that we learn to cultivate patience, acceptance, and self-compassion. We learn that we do not need to chase after others or fill our lives with noise in order to feel valuable. We realize that our worth does not depend on the frequency of someone's messages or the constant presence of others in our lives. Our value lies within ourselves, and it is in silence that we can reconnect with that inner truth. Furthermore, silence offers us a space for deepening our understanding of the world around us. Without the distractions of constant communication and external input, we can see things more clearly. We can observe life without judgment, accepting the flow of experiences as they come and go. In silence, we find clarity. We understand that the world is ever-changing, and the people in our lives may come and go, but the peace we find within ourselves remains constant. Zen encourages us to embrace silence as a teacher, one that guides us to greater self-awareness and understanding. It teaches us that we do not need to fill every moment with noise or activity in order to feel fulfilled. We can simply be. In the quiet moments, we come to know ourselves more deeply, and in that knowing, we find peace. Silence is not an absence of connection, but rather a space where we can reconnect with ourselves and the world in a more meaningful way. When we stop fearing silence, we begin to see it for what it truly is, a powerful tool for inner growth, a sanctuary for peace, and an opportunity to deepen our understanding of life and ourselves. Silence, in its purest form, is not empty, it is full of potential. It is a gift, a reminder that we are enough, just as we are, even when the world around us falls quiet. Zen and Buddhist teachings offer several powerful lessons that help us navigate silence and absence in relationships. These teachings guide us to find peace not in controlling others, but in understanding the deeper truths about our own inner experiences and the natural flow of life. The illusion of control. One of the greatest struggles we face when dealing with silence in relationships is the illusion of control. We often believe that we can control others' actions. We want to dictate when they call, when they message, and how often they reach out. When this expectation is not met, we experience frustration, anxiety, and disappointment. The fear of silence is born from this illusion that we can somehow manipulate the behavior of others to align with our desires. Zen teaches us that this need for control is an illusion. Just as the sky does not beg the bird to return, we cannot demand that others remain in our lives or behave in a particular way. Life unfolds as it will, and trying to control the actions of others is a source of suffering. Zen wisdom reminds us that we can only control our own thoughts, actions, and responses. When we release the need to control, we free ourselves from the anxiety and pain associated with unmet expectations. This release allows us to accept the natural ebb and flow of relationships without becoming attached to the idea that others must act in certain ways to fulfill our needs. By letting go of the illusion of control, we are able to approach relationships with greater ease and peace. We learn to accept others for who they are, rather than imposing our expectations onto them. This shift in perspective frees us from the emotional turmoil that comes with trying to control things beyond our reach. And it opens the door to more genuine, peaceful connections. The ego's craving for attention. Another significant source of anxiety when facing silence in relationships is the ego's craving for attention. Many of us tie our sense of self-worth to the attention we receive from others. When someone stops calling or messaging, we might feel abandoned, overlooked, or unimportant. Our ego convinces us that if we are not the center of someone's attention, we are not valued. This belief stems from a deep-seated insecurity that our worth is dependent on external validation. However, Zen and Buddhist teachings remind us that our true worth does not come from others' attention, but from within. In the words of the Buddha, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Our worth is intrinsic, not dependent on whether we are acknowledged or praised by others. Just as the sun shines without needing anyone's approval, our value remains constant regardless of whether someone calls or messages us. When we tie our sense of self-worth to external validation, we set ourselves up for suffering, because we are constantly at the mercy of others' actions. However, when we realize that our value comes from within, we free ourselves from this cycle of dependence. True self-worth is rooted in self-acceptance and inner peace, not in the attention or approval of others. This understanding allows us to embrace silence and absence with grace, knowing that we are whole and complete regardless of external circumstances. Embracing the flow of life. Life, by its very nature, is in a constant state of change. Relationships, emotions, and people are all subject to this flow. People come into our lives, and they also leave. Relationships evolve, and people grow in different directions. This constant flux can be unsettling, especially when we experience the absence of someone we care about. We may want to hold on to relationships and resist the natural changes that occur. But doing so only creates tension and pain. Zen teaches us to embrace the flow of life, rather than resist it. The teachings of impermanence remind us that everything in life is transient. And nothing lasts forever. The more we try to hold on to things, the more we create suffering for ourselves. Instead, we are encouraged to let go and allow life to unfold naturally, without trying to force or control its course. When we can accept the impermanence of relationships and experiences, we find true peace. Just as a river flows, never stagnant, our lives and relationships are always changing. Zen encourages us to ride this flow rather than trying to fight it. People will come and go, but our inner peace remains steady if we allow ourselves to move with the flow of life. The key to peace is not to resist change, but to accept it with an open heart. True tranquility comes when we stop trying to hold on to what is meant to pass and instead embrace what is happening in the present moment. When we stop clinging to relationships or trying to control the actions of others, we free ourselves to experience life more fully. We become more present, more grounded in the moment, and more at peace with the natural rhythms of life. Through Zen practice, we learn to let go of attachment and find contentment in the flow of life as it is, not as we think it should be. In the end, the teachings of Zen and Buddhism offer us profound wisdom on how to navigate silence, absence, and the changing nature of relationships. We are reminded that we do not need to control others or seek validation from them to feel complete. Our true worth is found within, and when we embrace the flow of life, we open ourselves to greater peace, understanding, and acceptance. In the end, when someone doesn't call or message for a long time, we are faced with a powerful choice. How we react to the silence in our lives will determine our peace of mind and emotional well-being. We can choose to react with suffering. We can obsess over their absence, letting doubt creep in and question our worth. We might wonder if we did something wrong, or if we've been forgotten. The silence, instead of offering us clarity, becomes a source of anxiety and pain. We may feel disconnected, abandoned, or unimportant, believing that someone's absence reflects our value in the world. We fill the empty space with all kinds of negative thoughts, allowing the silence to stir fear, insecurity, and sadness. But there is another path we can choose. We can respond with wisdom. Instead of viewing silence as something to fear, we can accept it as a natural part of life. In embracing the quiet, we learn to trust the flow of life. We begin to understand that people come and go, and that absence is not a reflection of rejection, but a part of the ever-changing nature of human relationships. We can turn inward, focusing on our own peace, and recognize that our worth is not determined by external circumstances or the attention we receive from others. Zen and Buddhist teachings remind us that true peace comes from within. It is not dependent on the actions of others or external validation. When we stop fearing silence, we begin to see it for what it truly is, a teacher. Silence has always been here, waiting to offer us lessons in patience, self-awareness, and growth. It invites us to reflect on our lives, to find clarity within, and to cultivate inner peace. Silence does not need to be an enemy. It is a gift that helps us connect with our true selves. The choice is ours. We can allow silence to stir pain and doubt, or we can embrace it as a space for growth and reflection. When we choose the latter, we open ourselves to deeper understanding, self-compassion, and peace. Silence becomes a fertile ground for healing, where we can let go of attachments, release fears, and find comfort in the stillness. It teaches us that we are whole and worthy, regardless of whether or not we are in constant contact with others. So, as you move through life, remember that your worth is never measured by the attention you receive from others. Your true value lies in the peace you hold within yourself. No matter how much silence surrounds you, it is always an opportunity to turn inward, to reflect, and to find the strength to stand in your own truth. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are always enough, just as you are.